The book of Exodus. If we think about the book of Exodus, sometimes in some Bibles, some of the older versions refer to this as the second book of Moses. Again, giving Moses the credit for the authorship. I don't know if Moses is the author of the book of Genesis. That's commonly accepted. Certainly Moses wrote the book of Exodus. And so some Bibles do refer to it as the second book of Exodus. I've got us a map tonight that I think is going to help us. Now, if you remember when Jacob and his family, they were in the land of Canaan right here. Okay? And they traveled, when they came to Egypt, this is approximately the route that they came to Egypt. And you'll notice this green portion in the upper left-hand corner of the map is the area of Goshen. Okay, now that area is rather sparsely, or was at this time, rather sparsely populated with Egyptians. The Egyptians really preferred the Nile River, which as we see comes down through this area here, and so the area of Goshen was hilly, but certainly not as desertous as some of the surrounding regions. So it made good for the herdsmen. If you recall, when in our study of the book of Genesis, when Jacob came down, that was the area that Pharaoh assigned by Joseph's request for the Israelite people. Now, a couple things I wanted to make note of that we have discussed. First of all, there are some things that Joseph made statements about. And Cynthia, I'm backing up for you tonight. Because I know you missed that last chapter of the book of Genesis, and I know you were really interested in that last paragraph. So we're going to back up into chapter 50 of the book of Genesis. I want you to make spatial note as we read this, what's going on and what statement Joseph makes before he dies. So Steve, will begin with you tonight. If you can read for us verse 22 through the end of that chapter.
So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and will bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. Then Joseph sent the sons of Israel. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt.
All right. What does Joseph say about God? That's right, Peter. God would visit. And what would God do when he visited them? Emma, I think you had something there. No? I'm pretty sure you said God would bring them up. Yeah, that's right. That's what I thought. God would bring them up. So what's he talking about, bring them up? You remember where our map was? Okay, so if our map, on the map, Goshen was over here, and then he went kind of around the sea, and the land of Canaan was up here. Canaan was the promised land. And so that was the idea. God was going to bring them up out of the land of Egypt into Canaan. All right. So is there anything else in here? that you guys see that you want to make note of before we get on there. You know, Ruth's whole concern was that the PowerPoint would make this too organized that we couldn't chase rabbit trails. Apparently she likes rabbit trails. So I promised that I would not keep this organized and that we would still have the freedom to chase rabbit trails and to carry on discussions that are not necessarily in line with the PowerPoint. So Cynthia, I think you had made a point about the generations that Joseph got to see.
Yeah, I think it's so neat that it's mentioned that he, let's see, and I can't remember still how it's put. The children of Manasseh were brought up on Joseph's knees. That's what it says.
Yes. The King James Version says that the children of Manasseh were brought up on Joseph's knees. Is the way the King James English Standard Version reads a little bit different, but the connotation is that when it's talking about Manasseh's in the English Standard, it says they were counted as his own. So it stands to my way of thinking that Joseph had a huge part in their upbringing. He saw 3 generations of Ephraim's children, but Manasseh's must have had a very special place in his life in his later years. So yeah, that's a good point, Cynthia.
From a grandparent's perspective too, just to be able to be there with the grandchildren.
Yes.
And to see those generations coming.
Yeah.
And be a part of it, it's something special.
Another aspect that we might not have considered. Yes, Joseph lived to be 110 years old, but remember he was not a young man when he married. He was in the middle of his life span, somewhere around 40, I would guess. We talked about that. So to see the length of children, the generations that he saw, was pretty incredible for the amount of time that he had after he was married and had children of his own. So again, this is to me an aspect that we're going to look at a little bit later as we begin the book of Exodus. Joseph made his children, or had his children make a promise. What was that promise? Bring his bones up. Now, why would we want to bring somebody's bones along? I mean, what's the point of lugging around? I think I said last week, what's the point of lugging around a box of bones? Peter?
They just didn't have to love bones. Technically, it was his body the way they stored it.
Ah, and that's right. You know, I meant to put a picture of a mummy on here, and I think I forgot that. Did you get the mummy on here? Oh, we forgot the mummy. So it was, yes, it was his body the way they preserved it, but he referred to that as his bones. And so what do they do? Do they bury Joseph when he dies? No. I don't remember. Is it golden? I don't remember that necessarily, Emma. Is it a golden box? It says they put him in a coffin, so I'll buy the box, but I'm not sure. Maybe it was gold. I don't know. But boy, that'd be an awful heavy box to lug around if it was. I seriously doubt that it was, but it may have had some gold inlay work on it. Who knows? You know, the Egyptians, they really like their fancy coffins. Cynthia?
He had a very high position.
Yes.
There
For a long period of time. Yeah, the Bible doesn't tell us.
there very well could have been, like you said, with some inlays or some fancy.
Yeah.
A little more expensive than the average.
Yeah, more than the average Joe could afford. So, Peter?
They would cut a statue face that would look like this, and the royalty would have it embroidered with gold.
You know what? You're getting good at your Egyptian history. Yes, that's right. The funeral mask is what I'll call it. Ruth? Ah, okay. All right. So you guys have been researching that. That's great. All right. So let's move on. I think we already touched on where Joseph's body was kept in a box or in a coffin. So Exodus. Do you remember what the word Exodus means? Peter? Vernon, very good, very good. Emma? Peter, what else does it mean? There's a little bit more. We've got it on the screen up here. Exodus is a military term. Okay? Now, marching out. Yes. So this is not a fleeing Egypt. This is not a retreat. This is a marching out of the people of Israel. And so we need to keep in mind the very name of the book would indicate what is going to take place in this book of history. So what I'd like for us to do is I'd like for us to, again, Celia, we'll go to you tonight. If you would, read verse 1 through 7, Celia, if you don't mind. 1 through 7, Celia, of Genesis or Exodus chapter 1.
These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them.
All right, so how many Israelites were there when they came to Egypt, guys? 70. Very good, very good. Now, is 70 a lot of people?
Necessarily, not if you count the nation of Egypt.
Not. So there we have it. The number 70 is subjective. You know, when you think about it, but when you think about it in perspective, as you did, Peter, you think about the number 70 in perspective of a nation. Well, that's not even a small village. You know, even little old Lower Salem, we are is credited, or where we live, the village itself is credited of having, I think, 200 people. And the number might have decreased since, but you know, and I said one time when Kate and I were getting to know each other, you know, she asked about where I lived, and I said, well, I think they counted the cats when they came up with 200 people living in the village of Lower Salem. But anyway, so when you think about that, that's a very small number of Israelites coming into Egypt, that number of 70. Now, in verse 7, though, we see here that well, actually below verse 7, the next paragraph, we're going to see that the Egyptians became afraid of the Israelites. Why would they become afraid? Because the answer's in this paragraph in verse 7. It became bigger. Okay, Peter, is that what you were going to say? Okay, give us your details.
It became big enough that they thought that the Israelites wants to take over their nation.
So there's gonna be enough of them that there's a threat to the country of Egypt. Ruth?
It's like a small amount of people suddenly become larger and grow.
Yeah, now something we need to get in our minds is we know that Joseph lived to see the third generation. So the number, the time span. Sometimes we think we turn one page in our Bible and it's just like a week or two has passed, or a year or two even. But this is generations. Now that's not discounting what's happening here, because the children of Israel are multiplying. I'm sure if they were around today, I was talking to a preacher friend of mine today about about some stuff, and he said, well, he said something about, his daughter's birthday, and he needed to arrange his schedule around his daughter's birthday, and I was like, oh, I remember those days when I had enough children that I could arrange my schedule around their birthdays. I'm like, now with having 8 children and the 9th one on the way, if I scheduled everything around all the birthdays, I probably wouldn't accomplish anything. And Neil has never met my family. I've met Neil, but Neil has never met my family, and obviously had not done enough Facebook research to find out how many kids I have. And he goes, you have how many kids? And I said, well, Lord willing, next month we'll have 9. And he just responded with just the emoticon of the open mouth going. So, yes, people can multiply quickly, as our family's living proof, but not everyone multiplies quickly, and apparently the Egyptians did not multiply as quickly as the Hebrew people. And I think what the Bible would indicate here, it says, but the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. And I think last week we looked at that and talked about the blessing that was, and how that was a commandment. That was the first commandment given to Noah when he left the ark, was to be fruitful and multiply. Ruth, you had a thought.
Are you trying to make us think of Egyptians?
No, I'm not making us Egyptians or Hebrews in this case. No, that's not the goal and mission in my life. But in verse 8, I want to pick up here and read verse 8 through 14. Peter, why don't you begin us off with verse 8, and then we'll see how that goes, and maybe someone else will pick up from that point.
And you came over Egypt. You did not know Joseph and his aid
Said,
to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many, and too many for us.
come, let us deal shrewdly with them.
With them, let them,
lest they multiply
multiply and
if war
war
breaks
out. They join
enemies
and fight against us and
Escape.
escape from the land.
Okay, hold on. Let's let Ruth take over there in verse 11. She's got to find her place now. Exodus chapter 1, verse 11. Hey, why don't you finish that paragraph out if you're able? Yes, 12 through 14.
But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel, so they ruthlessly made the people of Israel worthless slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service and mortal and all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves.
All right, so in the 1930s and 40s, Adolf Hitler coined a term, the Jewish problem. That's exactly what Pharaoh is doing right here. The only thing is, Pharaoh, unlike Adolf Hitler, does not want to annihilate the Israelite people from the face of the earth, but he has two fears. The first fear that we see is the fear that they would join the enemies. He says, behold, in verse 9, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. His first fear in verse 10 says, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us. That's the first concern, is that they would join the enemies of the Egyptians and fight against them. The second, that they would escape from the land. So here we have a twofold problem. Now, first of all, can anyone imagine why Pharaoh would be concerned about the Israelite people joining the enemies? Any ideas? I think if we would go back in our book, in the book of Genesis, I think we would find the answer to that. Do you remember when the Israelites came down into the land of Egypt? Do you remember that what a shepherd was to the Egyptian people?
An abomination, right?
That's right, Katie. The shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptian people. And we also saw when Joseph's brothers first came down to Egypt and they were visiting with him, do you remember the table arrangements? There was a table in Joseph's house. There was a table for Joseph as governor of Egypt and his family. And then there was a table for the Egyptians, the servants. And then there was a table for the Hebrews. And it was noted there for Hebrews were an abomination to the Egyptian people. So can you imagine living in a segregated world, a segregated country? Can you imagine if war broke out with Egypt, with a nation that might not have felt that the Hebrews were an abomination? Can you imagine that the Hebrews would certainly want to join that country in fighting against the Egyptians? Because after all, they have been the brunt of the Egyptians for generations now. And so even as far as a lot of most of the marriages, Egyptians didn't marry Hebrews, Hebrews didn't marry Egyptians for the most part throughout this time period. But remember Joseph? You guys remember Joseph? Well, yeah, he married an Egyptian, but what did he do for the land of Egypt? Yeah, that's right, Peter. Essentially, Joseph saved the land of Egypt during the famine period. But how long has he been gone? How long has Joseph been dead? Well, we really don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. But we can rest assured it has been quite a period of time. And again, don't know that 100% for sure how long he's been dead, but it's been long enough that he has been forgotten. Because, just a minute, Peter, I'll get to you in just a second. Because it says here, now there arose a king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So this fella had no memory of the great things. That just goes to show the greatest person on earth is going to someday die, and sooner or later the earth is going to forget that he ever existed. So, Peter, what's your thought there?
It should have been pretty so long that the Egyptians would tell stories of when their grandfathers, great-great-grandfathers, and if it was soon, they would thought of Joseph as this good guy that Pharaoh doesn't really like.
Are you saying that my stories about your ancestors are important?
That would be the only way that they could be short period.
That's the only way you're going to know about someone that's long dead, huh? Okay. All right. So Pharaoh was afraid of them because he was afraid they were going to overtake them. And he had forgotten Joseph. But then he says in verse 10, let us deal shrewdly with that. And Cynthia, I've forgotten. What does your King James Version say there? Wisely. Wisely. So again, this is not earthly wisdom. And I think that's why the English Standard Version chose the word shrewdly for that word. Both words fit very well, but we don't want to get confused with godly wisdom in that word wisely. And so he says we're gonna come up with a plan, and we're gonna fix this problem. So what was Pharaoh's plan to deal with that problem? Do you remember?
Make it more common.
That's right. That's found in verse 11. He sets taskmasters over them. And he says that the purpose of that was to afflict them with heavy burdens. So in other words, we're going to work them to the point to where they're not going to feel like having more children. Because children are a lot of work, right? We understand that. Those of us who have children, even those who don't have children. Ruth, she understands children are a lot of work because she has to help with a lot of little brothers and sisters. So I want to think about these cities for just a moment. These storehouse cities. We're gonna think about those. And Pithrom and Ramus are referred to as store cities. The Hebrew word means a magazine store or storehouse. or a stored up treasure is essentially what that word means. And so it was literally that. It was a place to store stuff. Now, what strikes me as interesting, we talked about this before, Peter, who came up with the idea of storing up valuables in Egypt?
Joseph came up with the idea because of famine and needed somewhere to store the food and material.
Okay, that's right. Now, I looked for a map to try to locate where these cities were. I found a lot of possible pictures, but I could not actually locate them on a map. I'm sure there's a map or something out there that would locate these, but is it? Kate says it's on the main map, but so we'll hit that again when we get to that map. But anyway, we were trying to find as likely a pictures as anything for that, but we found the one and put it on there. Now, did Pharaoh's solution for what I'll refer to as the Jewish problem in Egypt, did it work? Okay. What happened?
They went the opposite direction.
They went the opposite direction, didn't it, Ruth? I think you lost me there. Everything multiplies. Is that what you're getting at? All right. Verse 15 through 22. Cynthia, do you feel like reading tonight? You want to read verse 15 through 22 for us?
I will try.
Okay, if you get stuck or something and can't see to finish, Steve will pick that up.
And the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shipra, and the name of the other Hua. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called after the midwives and said unto them, why have you done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Therefore, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Now, we have talked before when we studied this section about a birth stool. Right here is a picture of a birth stool. Now, there are variations of this, but this is a birthing stool used even today by midwives, and probably something very similar to this is used in Egypt. Like I say, there's some variations, but this is a pretty standard, simple birthing stool. Peter, you had a thought.
When there's any to cast all the money into, like,
River.
that was asking me where there's two boys that were born and and tossed them into the river and after that the cops were lost.
Yeah, I think that's a story, yes. I remember the story, but yeah, that's true. Let's think about this, what Pharaoh's doing, though. Yeah. Who did Pharaoh give instructions to kill all the baby boys? Who did he give those instructions to? Who's that, Vernon? The midwives. We find that in verse 15. Now, I have a question for you. We have some states in this country that have now legalized, basically, they've essentially have legalized killing a child after it's born. Now, these midwives had a response to Pharaoh's order. And Shiphrah and Puah, their names remain in the Bible. Moses recorded their names. And that fact that he recorded these two women's names just stands to reason how much these two women were honored and revered by the children of Israel generations after they are gone. I mean, this is generations that these women have been gone. But Moses recorded their names for us to remind us of who they were and to tell us what and how they were remembered. Now, let me ask you this. In thinking about things, why did the midwives disobey Pharaoh's order? There's a very specific reason given us. Because why, Emma? Peter, what's your answer?
Because the midwives feared God.
That's absolutely correct. They feared God. What does it mean to fear God? This might be an adult question. What does it mean to fear God? Okay. There's a song, I don't think we sing it here very often, or maybe we never have, but I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise, that spread the flowing seas abroad and built the lofty skies. God is powerful. Now, this is interesting, and I want you to notice something in here. We're going to get to something next week, but something that I find interesting. Actually, let's just go ahead. I want to turn to Joshua for a minute. When Joshua makes that great statement, Joshua chapter 24, and we'll revisit this passage next week, but in Joshua chapter 24, Joshua makes a great statement, and he's telling the Israelite people, he says, now therefore, in Joshua 24:14, now therefore fear the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods, small g, that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And even if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods, small g, or your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods, small g, of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and for my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, when Joshua makes that statement, there's something that we need to pick up on. That Moses is not recording for us right now at this time in the book of Exodus. We need to pick up on that the children of Israel were caught up in idolatry. Okay? However, these two Hebrew midwives, And whether it was just 2 Hebrew midwives or whether these 2 were overseers of other midwives, we do not know. But these 2 Hebrew midwives feared God. And so I want to stress to you that these 2 midwives were not caught up in idolatry. But Joshua's statement would indicate that some of the children of Israel were caught up in idolatry. And over in Exodus chapter 2, we'll get to, Lord willing, next week, we'll see how some of the other children of Israel were caught up in idolatry, at least to a point, and had forgotten the God of their fathers. So these 2 midwives disobeyed God because they feared God and respected God. What can we learn from this? What lesson can we take away from this?
To not to forget Almighty God.
That's right. Don't forget God. God's important not to forget. But let me ask you this, Peter. Can we remember God and not fear God? Ruth, is it possible to remember God and not serve God? Vernon, is it possible to remember God, not fear God enough that we're willing to disobey Him? It is possible. It is possible. Let's look at Acts chapter 5. In Acts chapter 5, we have an incident with the disciples. And they're in a position where they have to choose who they respect more. Do they respect the Jewish Sanhedrin? Or do they respect God? Friends, I want you to entertain the thought with me tonight that there are times in our lives where we have to choose who we're going to respect and who we're going to fear. Listen to the response that Peter gives. But Peter and the other apostles answered, "We must obey God rather than men." And that is the attitude which led these midwives to be pleasing in the sight of God. Now, when the midwives went back, when Pharaoh called these midwives back in, and they told him this, he said, "Why haven't you done?" Now, let me get back here in my Bible. He pulls the midwives back in. And in verse 18, so the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this? And let the male children live." What's the response? That's right. That's right. They had the babies before we could get there. Now, there's a couple things in this. I want you to think about this. Is this a lie or is this the truth? Did the midwives lie to Pharaoh? We don't know. It is quite possible that they did not. Or it's possible that they did. The Bible does not tell us that. But what I want you to notice is their response. And this cracks me up every time I read the response. The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." Now, this is kind of almost a slap in the face to the Egyptian women to a point. You know, they're not these weak, spindly things. These women are tough. Okay? Let's think about that. These women are tough. Cynthia, you had a thought.
Countless stories of women who go into labor and deliver on the way to the hospital. Or in the middle of a snowstorm and the husband and nobody, the emergency squad or whoever can't get there fast enough. And I know with me, my doctor told Greg, the next one you have, if she says ow, get her now. So, there are some women, and I have no doubt in my mind that God blessed these people with, with this. That, and if there's only 2 of them serving, I mean, we don't know, like you said, if they were the chiefs, or if there were more of them, but on foot or on camel or donkey, whatever mode of transportation.
Yeah. Now here's my perspective, Ruth. I'll get to you in just a second. Here's my perspective on this. The midwives feared God enough to disobey Pharaoh's order. What makes us think they're going to stand there and tell a bold-faced lie to Pharaoh and risk hellfire and damnation for telling a lie? I realize the law of Moses has not yet been handed down, but to lie has been wrong since the creation of the world. Cain lied to God. Adam and Eve lied to God. All of those things are sin and have been sin from the beginning. Ruth first, and then I'll get to you, Peter. Ruth?
Wouldn't there be more midwives if the nation was really that big?
Let me ask you this. You start with 70 people. How many children do you think can be born in a year's time? Okay, now let's think about this. Maybe, like I said at the beginning, maybe these are 2 head midwives that coordinate things. It's possible. I don't know. I kind of doubt it. I'm thinking these 2 are the 2 midwives that service, all of the Hebrew people. I don't know for sure. But maybe they're like the Frida Millers of Ohio that just coordinate all these other midwives, work with them and around them. I don't know. Peter?
If this did tell those 2 women, the Bible says they speeded up pace with birth.
That's right. That's right. That's what the midwives told Pharaoh.
More than a couple babies had people needed the midwives.
Well, to Bruce's point, obviously there weren't enough midwives to go around that couldn't make it to the births. And so, I don't know. But I don't, after giving this some thought and consideration, I don't think that the midwives told Pharaoh a lie. I really don't. With that having been said, what's Pharaoh's solution to this now? He gives a solution that goes beyond the midwives. Peter?
With having killing as many babies on my mind would slow the valley down. It would slow me down. I'm packing up.
Okay. Now, Pharaoh now gives a commandment to all his people. So everyone in Egypt, all the Egyptians, you see a boy, throw him in the river. Kill him. Be done with him. We'll see next how that turns out in Exodus chapter 2.